Hey, I'm Aaron, and I'm an editor. I'm actually editing the video you're about to watch right now. I love editing because to me it really is the magic of filmmaking, but for some reason I don't know a whole lot of other editors. I know writers, directors, actors, even cinematographers, but not really any other editors. I'd like to joke that it's because they're all inside on their computers, like I am right now, but I think it's really because not enough people understand the magic of editing. Magic might sound like a strong word to the uninitiated, but it's how I'm able to switch from camera 1 to camera 2 between this take. It's also how I'm able to talk like this, even though I'm like 20 feet away from the camera. And even better, through the magic of editing, I can hide the fact that this was actually two entirely separate takes, evident by the fact that I'm wearing shoes in this take and I'm not wearing shoes in this take. But that's just the simple stuff. If that's all editing was, then editing would be little more than just putting footage together. Every short film I've ever worked on has gone through major changes, from idea to screenplay to filming to editing. Usually this is because we encounter problems while filming that the director decides we can fix in post, meaning I'll fix it so they don't have to. So the footage I was left with didn't line up perfectly with the screenplay I was working off of. This makes editing much more than just putting footage together, because my work as an editor was truly to build the best possible story using the footage I was given. This meant playing around with cuts and transitions, audio, timing, and movement and continuity, as well as fixing it in post to create the best film I can after everyone else's jobs are done. One of my favorite things about editing is that it's truly unique to filmmaking. In many ways, theater is the predecessor to film. Both films and theater have writers, directors, actors, and even the live audience point of view is mimicked by single-camera sitcoms. But only editing is completely unique to filmmaking. Not only that, but editing is a necessity in filmmaking. You know the saying, where there's smoke, there's fire? Well, where there's film, there's editing. Stage plays developed before there was any knowledge of film or editing or any of that. So the guidelines for telling a story on a stage are a lot different from telling a story in front of a camera. You can see this reflected in Aristotle's Poetics, which is literally the first work of dramatic theory that we know about. According to Aristotle, there were three main types of drama. You had comedy and satyr plays, but most importantly, there was tragedy. Many of the main elements of tragedy focus on the types of stories and characters that should be in a play. Because of the structure of the ancient Greek plays that Aristotle was familiar with, a lot of these things make sense. For instance, a lot of action happens off stage, and the audience usually just sees the characters discussing those actions and deciding their next move when they're on stage. For this reason, it makes sense that plots and characters need to be grounded and relatable, because the audience is only able to imagine the big action scenes while the actors are off stage. There are also these concepts called the three unities, those being the unity of action, unity of time, and unity of place. These all refer to having a single plot line that follows a clean cause and effect order, the story taking place within roughly one 24-hour window, and the central action all happening within one place. These unities make a lot of sense when you consider that these plays took place on a single stage with a single background in front of a live audience. It's not hard to imagine how stage plays, which develop from this framework, end up being entirely different from film, which requires the use of editing. The simple introduction of the ability to edit in cuts and transitions, audio, timing, and movement and continuity create an entirely different type of storytelling magic than what we see on stage. Let's look at an example of how editing can affect the final outcome of a scene, even if it's in really subtle ways. Our first scene is this famous hypnosis scene from Get Out. First off, I'd just like to point out that this is a very dialogue-heavy scene, but it still differs hugely from the script. This goes back to what I said earlier, that the editors couldn't just put the footage together according to the screenplay. They had to build their own story based off the footage that was given to them. Looking at the scene, I was able to break it into three basic layers. You got Chris shots, Missy shots, and all the cut-ins and cutaways. We start the scene simply going back and forth between Chris and Missy as they talk. Each shot is held for about 3 to 5 seconds, and the screen time is pretty even between them. Then, when Missy asks Chris about his mother,
"What about your mother?"
the mood changes. We hold on Chris for twice as long now, about 6 to 7 seconds each, and we only still get quick shots of Missy. We see a quick cut-in on Missy's teacup, and we hear the audio of the spoon scraping and clinking. But the audio carries on after the shot. By the way, when the audio of a shot carries on after the video, that's called an L cut. Then, when the hypnosis really starts to set in, we get a couple of shots on Missy that are also held for about 6 seconds each. Again, this is twice as long as before, and we start to hear the sounds of rain slowly build up.
You hear it? Find it. Tell me when you found it.
There's two shots held on Chris, which are broken up by a cutaway to a flashback, which the rain sounds are from. By the way, when the audio of a shot appears before the video, that's called a J-cut. Now, we see one more shot of the teacup, followed by almost 30 seconds of uninterrupted Chris. Like, 30 seconds. We can still hear Missy talking, but we only see this same shot of Chris for almost half of an entire minute. 30 seconds is a really long time, especially when the longest held shot before that was only about 9 seconds. Do you know how awkward it would be if I just had a shot of me sitting here for almost 30 seconds? Anyways, as this shot is held, we hear the teacup, now louder than before, as well as music slowly building up. When we finally get back to the shots of Missy, they instantly switch back to Chris when she's done talking. There's no dead space afterwards. We are still mostly seeing Chris during this part of the scene, but the shots aren't held for long as they are interrupted by cut-ins to the teacup as its audio gets louder and louder still, and a match cut of flashback Chris's hands to present Chris's hands. Finally, once Chris is paralyzed, we have two longer shots of Missy as she takes full control of the scene. They are broken up by a reaction shot of Chris crying and a cut in to Chris's hands clenched up. This cut-in serves to set up the later on shot of his hands flying open. That's called continuity. And when she tells him to sink
into the floor.
Wait.
Sink.
the audio is heavily distorted and echoed to give it that much more emphasis. A lot of these little editing tricks, like how long we're holding shots, when the audio comes in and how loud it is at any given moment, and the continuity between cut-in shots are all things that largely go unnoticed, even though the scene would feel completely different without them. Now that you have an idea of how I look at a scene from an editing point of view, let's look at another one. This time, the final scene from Sunset Boulevard. Now this scene is very different from the one from Get Out for two big reasons. First off, Sunset Boulevard was made using a much older style of filmmaking that has longer held shots, more camera movement, and less camera angles. And secondly, this scene actually does follow the screenplay pretty well. But the screenplay just isn't very detailed, so it leaves a lot of room for the director to make creative decisions. This shows us that even in cases where the editors can work based off the screenplay, they still have a lot that is left up to interpretation. The timeline of this scene wasn't as easy to split into layers since the shots were wider and had more camera pans and tilts than in Get Out, but I still basically split it into 3 layers. We have Norma, Max, and everyone else. As you can see, throughout the entire scene, Norma is easily the primary focus. She has more shots on her and they're held for much longer. The first 3 shots of the scene are all wide shots of Norma ignoring all the people around her, and they're held for about 10 seconds each. When Norma hears that the cameras are here though, we suddenly cut to a close-up of just her, and it's held for over 15 seconds, along with music, which comes in suddenly and continues to build up slowly afterwards. The policemen clear out, Max gets the cameras ready, and Norma exits her room, and they have a quick exchange. The exchange between Max and Norma is interesting though. Each shot of Norma is over 5 seconds long, and each shot of Max is under 5 seconds long. Max calls for the cameras, and we actually hear them start to roll, and Norma makes her final descent down the stairs. This shot of Norma coming down the stairs is held for 32 seconds, which, as I said in the last scene, is kind of crazy, but through the combination of camera movement, Joe's narration, and the crescendo of the soundtrack, which you can actually see really well in the waveform, those 32 seconds go by without me even realizing. As Norma reaches the bottom of the stairs, we get a couple of reaction shots as the music dies down. Finally, we get one massive shot of Norma. It would be almost a minute long if it weren't for the 4 seconds of Max near the end. During her speech, the music is fairly quiet and there's no camera movement at all. This is really just 48 seconds of Norma, a quick reaction shot, and then 11 more seconds of her approaching the camera as we fade to black and see the end. Ending this scene and the entire film with such a heavy emphasis on Norma leaves the audience with no doubt about who they're supposed to be thinking about, and leaves them with no choice of who they're going to remember after the credits roll, which is incredibly resonant with this film's message. Editing that not only enhances the focus of a scene, but also resonates with the thematic elements of the film is truly a sign of editors who can get inside the minds of their audience and manipulate the footage to tell the best story possible. These types of dissections honestly only begin to explore the work of an editor. I wasn't even able to talk about visual effects, color grading, chroma keying, ADR, anything else, honestly. But even still, these scenes wouldn't have nearly the same impact if it weren't for the editor's work in guiding our focus and building upon the dramatic themes of the films. And, you know, even when the editor's work does go unnoticed, Actually, especially when it goes unnoticed, it's completely instrumental in creating the end product that audiences get to see. Because if it goes unnoticed, it's often the most thankless and unrecognized job. So next time you come across one of those mythical editors that I've heard about but I've never actually been able to meet, don't be afraid to thank them for their work. And directors, please, as if we don't already have enough on our plate, stop saying we'll fix it in post. Alright, hit me with a beat. Hey, my name's Aaron and I took this class, THF 220, that I need to pass. So I made this video kinda thing to teach you all about editing. Sunset Boulevard and Get Out, both movies that have a lot of clout. This is my video, I've been your host. Don't leave it to the editor to fix it in post. Alright.